It's a really informal talk that I gave to the NOAA Fisheries R user group, and it was a quick start to using R to get data from REST APIs. It's very informal, kind of rough. I'm going to do this in two parts. The first part is the part just about pinging a REST API, and then in the second part, I'll talk about creating an R package to make a client to make it a little easier to get data from these. So what's a REST API? You can go online, search on that, get all the details, but this is the too long don't care version. It's a way for you to get some data off a database using a URL. If, of course, the people who set up the database also set up a REST API for you. But let's say they did. So let's go ahead and get some data from it. So let's jump in and just first see an example. You can run this code. This is using the GitHub REST API. It doesn't need a token or key or any kind of authentication. All it needs is, we just need a URL right here. This is what it is. You can see I'm using paste here. So if I had that in there, it'd be like org : that right there, right? So it just takes a URL that you've constructed. And a really simple way to do this is to use the httr package with git. And just to run that with the URL. It's, what the API returns can vary. JSON is pretty common though. And in this case, it's returning JSON by default. And so you get that result, it's JSON, and you want to turn that into something else. In particular, let's say you want to turn it into a data frame. And this often works right here. And just use JSONLite from JSON. And I don't actually know why you need to have raw to car, but that's what I've always used. I got that from somebody else. It works really well for me. These two lines of code, header, and then JSONLite like that. You do need to know where the JSON that you want to process is, and what it returns is going to return a list, and one of those things is going to be the content. I think sometimes what it's called varies, so you may have to kind of look at what it's returning, look at that list. And you can see here now it returns a data frame in the items bit, and it's got the name and issues. It has a lot of other things too. Okay, so now let's jump to a more realistic, well, not more realistic, that's a very realistic case. Let's go to a different kind of REST API. In this case, this is a REST API for some data from StreamNet. It's salmon data that I wanted to get. And this database does have a REST API, and they've got a little bit of documentation there. I will say that I have found that often the documentation for these it's not always helpful for what you want to do. In this case, the documentation is super helpful if you want to push up to their database. But I didn't want to do that. I want to pull data down. And so for that, most of the info was there, but not all of it. Let's see if I can kind of show you what that looks like here. Yeah, so it's just kind of showing you a little bit, some example usage. And it looks really helpful, except when you actually start trying to write your R code. Don't be shocked if you're kind of like, I don't really know what to do. So in my case, even reading that, I could not figure out how to make that URL. And let's not talk about keys right now. So I needed the URL so that I could put it into that Git thing. So remember, I showed you Git, and I need to have a URL to it, and it needs to be proper. Could not figure that out. So finally, what I did is my collaborator knows the developers of this who set up the REST API. So I just asked them, can you show me an example of a URL that will work? And once I got that, I discovered that this API requires an API key. I kind of knew that from the documentation, but I could not figure out how to pass that in. And once I saw the proper URL, I saw that, they are passing it in as this parameter, and that's the name that they gave it. The people who set up the REST API will give their parameters names, and you're not going to know ahead of time what they called these things. So you have to get that from them or get that from their documentation. Okay. So that's how I got my first URL, and at that point, I could begin to understand this. I could understand the structure. So let's parse this URL that I got. So the first part of it, the blue part that I have here, it's what's called the base. The base URL, this is their database. And then after that, this part are the kind of tables within that. So in this case, this is sort of, these are particular tables that you can get. And the .json part is just saying, hey, return JSON. In this case, I don't ever have to use that because by default, it returns JSON. Okay, so that's the first part, and you need to figure out what this base is and then figure out what the things it's adding on are. If we look at the, let's go back here for a sec. So when you're looking at your documentation, you're going to see, does it give you an idea? It doesn't tell you what the base is, but if you look at this and you know that part of it's the base, and part of it is the kind of extra part, you're going to see a pattern here. And so hopefully it kind of becomes clear to you that all of them have this API v1 to them. And that hopefully is going to clue you in to the fact that this is the base, and then all these other things are the things that you tag onto that. Okay, so that's how you kind of can sort of use your detective skills to figure out what the base is. Okay, so now let's go back here to this URL. So we've got that base, and then we have the question mark. After the question mark are our query parameters. So it's a name followed by an equal sign. So this is a query parameter. That's what the name is, query parameter. And then this is the value for that. And then if you have more than one query parameter, it's going to be separated by @ signs. Okay, so this is @ and there's another name. You can see that's a query parameter. And then it's equal, and then here's another one, and then it's there's the name. You see it's equal. So you can see in this case we have 4 query parameters. This format with the question mark and then the @ signs between them is, I think that's like the form that I've seen like 95% of the time. Every so often, there's like a different format where it's like they're separated by plus signs, but this is the format I've pretty much always seen. So once you know the format, you're going to be able to look at these URLs and identify, aha, these are the query parameters. And then you'll get some idea about, what types of things they can take. Like, for example, this takes numbers. Okay, so with that, then hopefully you can start playing around with some of your URLs and passing them into httr like this, and then I can process them. And in this case, what this one returns is some tables, and it has all these table IDs, which I'm going to need later. So by just playing around, I start to understand what this database is and where I can find what I need. Okay, I want to talk just a little bit about your API keys. you'll notice that I X'd it out. Now, the database I'm hitting on it's a public database. I could have put the key there. It's a public read-only key. It's not anything secure. It's not anything sensitive. But just because I'm posting this publicly, I didn't want like bots or something to grab it and then like bang away at their database. I don't know if that'd do harm, but it didn't seem like a good thing. So keeping your API keys private is important. Like I said, the one that I'm using happens to be a public read-only one, but oftentimes your keys, it's like a password, and you do not want to have these raw in your code. So it's important to learn early on how to work with keys without including them in your code. Because like if you are sharing your code with people, you just don't want to get in the habit of passing these around in plain text. It's super easy to work with APIs without putting them in your code. And what you want to do is you're going to put them in your R environment file, assuming you're working with a key that you're okay storing it in plain text. So you're going to store it in your R environment file, and you're not going to push that up to GitHub or Git, or, whatever version control you're using. You don't share this file with other people. It's your file. And when you start R is going to run the code in there and load up any variables that you've set. So let's see what it looks like. To do this, it's really easy to use the use this package. So if you do use this and then just say use this, edit our environment, that's going to open up, it's either going to create or open up your .r environment file. It'll tell you where it is, so you don't have to find this thing. It's kind of hidden, right? It's usually in your user directory, and like you don't want to waste time trying to find that. So you just say use this edit .r environment. It's going to open it up for you, and then within that file you can put in some code like this. Okay? Obviously, it's not text. It's going to be the actual API key. Just like that. You just put that in that R environment file. Restart R. You have to do that whenever you edit your .r environment file. So you're going to restart R. Oops. And now, whenever you need that API key, you just run this code right here. And it's going to get it for you. So you never have the actual key in there. So this would be what your code would look like to use that key. So here I would say paste 0, and then here's my base, everything up to the question mark, and now I want this X API key. Oh, I got a typo there. That should have been uppercase. Anyhow, got that. And now I'm going to paste in this right here. So I can share that with anyone, and I'm not sharing the key. The only thing to keep in mind, like I said, this R environment file is unencrypted. So there are some kind of keys, like keys to some kind of, cloud server, AWS keys that you wouldn't want to have unencrypted just laying around on your machine. But, if it's not so sensitive, this R environment is a popular way to save them. All right, going to stop there, and next video will be about creating a R package to make an R client.